Some people don't kill out of rage. They kill out of entitlement. My name is Detective Hale. For years, I've investigated cases that were never meant to be reopened. Some truths are hidden, others are buried, but every secret leaves a trace. Natalia Brandon was found just after dawn. Not in an alley, not in a hotel room, not somewhere anonymous, but in her own bedroom. The kind of room designed for magazines. Soft light, expensive textures, controlled elegance. 5 shots had been fired. No signs of forced entry. No overturned furniture. No shattered glass. The room was almost composed. Natalia Brandon had once been a model. The kind of beauty that didn't fade. It transitioned. She became the face of luxury cosmetics, jewelry campaigns, private events in rooms where everyone smiled and no one trusted each other. She had married well. Robert Brandon, businessman, established. The kind of man who preferred contracts to arguments. They lived in a house that did not need to prove its wealth. It simply existed in it. And yet, sometime between midnight and morning, that house had become a crime scene. 5 shots are not panic. They are certainty. The first officers on scene saw what was obvious. A woman shot in her own bedroom. No sign of forced entry. Front door locked. They began asking the usual questions. Who benefits? Who had access? Who knew her schedule? But questions asked too early tend to choose their own answers. I prefer to observe first. The bedroom told a quiet story. There were no defensive wounds, no signs of struggle, no overturned bedside lamp. She either knew the person standing there or trusted them. That narrows the world considerably. Her husband had been out of town. At least, that's what the itinerary suggested. There were no surveillance cameras on the property, no neighbors reporting screams. The shots had been clean, precise. 5 shots leave no doubt about intention. Whoever pulled the trigger wanted her gone. Natalia Brandon was not just a woman. She was an image. And images are rarely honest. As I stood in that room, looking at the space where perfection had collapsed, I knew one thing. This was not a random act. This was not burglary. This was not desperation. This was personal. Very personal. 5 bullets. In a house with no broken locks. In a life that, from the outside, looked flawless. When something looks flawless, it usually means someone worked very hard to hide the cracks. And in my experience, love hides the deepest ones. The first conversation was inevitable. The husband always comes first. Robert Brandon did not look like a grieving man, but he did not look unaffected either. He looked controlled. Successful men learn that expression is a liability. Emotion is expensive. Composure is currency. Bob Brandon was the founder and CEO of a company valued in the millions. A man used to negotiation rooms, investor dinners, and careful wording. He had been the one to find her. That detail matters. There are two kinds of men who find their wives dead: the ones who break, and the ones who calculate. Bob did neither. He reported the timeline clearly. That evening, he said, he had been at the office. A late meeting with potential investors, witnesses, calendar entries, the kind of alibi built in advance, or perfectly convenient. He claimed he knew of no enemies, no threats, no disputes, no jealous admirers. Their marriage, he said, had been strong. We were a dream couple. That was the phrase he used. Famous, wealthy, admired. He spoke of public appearances, charity galas, joint interviews, the kind of life that photographs well. When I asked about arguments, he paused. Just long enough. Nothing unusual, he said. Nothing unusual is rarely the same as nothing at all. He said he couldn't understand why anyone would want Natalia dead. But confusion can be rehearsed. Grief, on the other hand, cannot. There were no visible cracks in his narrative. No trembling hands, no shifting eyes, no contradictions. Only precision. Bob Brandon was a man used to maintaining image. And image is fragile. Before I left, he offered one detail. In the afternoon, Natalia had received a visitor. Linda, her closest friend. A woman who had known her long before the magazines, before the business empire, before the house with the silent bedroom. He mentioned it casually, almost as an afterthought. She stopped by for coffee. People rarely stop by for coffee without bringing something else with them. History, secrets, resentment. If Linda had seen Natalia that afternoon, she might have been the last person to see her alive. Or perhaps not. In cases like this, the obvious path is rarely the shortest one. But it is always where we begin. Linda was devastated. Or at least, that was the first impression. Some people collapse under grief. Others perform it. The difference is subtle, but it exists. When I first met Linda, her eyes were red, her voice trembled, her hands would not stay still. She had known Natalia longer than anyone else in that house. Longer than the marriage, longer than the fame, longer than the carefully curated image. They had grown up together, shared bedrooms during sleepovers, shared secrets, shared dreams that once felt equal. Both had stepped into the world of modeling. Both had believed they would be seen, but only one of them became unforgettable. Natalia had continued. Linda had not. Careers shift, ambitions fade, but comparison never truly disappears. Linda cried as she spoke about childhood, about loyalty, about how Natalia had always been too kind for this world. That sentence stayed with me. Too kind. People rarely describe ambitious women that way. I asked her about the afternoon visit. She said it had been ordinary. Coffee, conversation, the kind of visit that fills time rather than changes it. They had spoken about schedules, about public appearances, about Bob's travel plans. Nothing unusual, nothing heated, nothing that would hint at violence. Her story flowed easily, too easily. When grief is real, memories come fragmented. When grief is constructed, the narrative is smooth. I asked her if Natalia had seemed worried. No, she said immediately. Too quickly. Then she corrected herself. Well, not worried, just tired. Tired can mean many things. Physically exhausted, emotionally strained, or carrying something she had not shared. Linda insisted they had parted warmly. A hug. A promise to meet again next week. She left around late afternoon. No argument, no tension, just routine. And yet, within hours, Natalia was dead. 5 shots in a house with no broken locks. I watched Linda carefully. Her tears arrived on cue. Her voice cracked at the right moments. But grief has weight. And I did not see weight. I saw precision. There was one more detail. She mentioned the bedroom. Not in general terms. Specifically. She was most likely trying to reach the window, to shout for help, when she was shot and fell to the floor. That assumption interested me. The position of the body had not been disclosed publicly. The police had been careful with that. And yet Linda spoke as if she knew. I did not challenge her immediately. People reveal more when they feel safe. Still, suspicion is not proof. Emotion is not evidence. And jealousy, no matter how old, does not automatically become murder. But it does leave a trace, especially when it has had years to grow. I returned to Linda with one simple question. Nothing else? She hesitated. Grief pauses differently than calculation. Then she sighed. There were personal matters. Personal matters rarely stay personal once someone is dead. Linda told me what the public did not know. The marriage between Natalia and Bob had not been perfect. It had been functional. There is a difference. For years, she said, they had lived like partners in a contract. Appearances intact. Public unity maintained. Private distance carefully concealed. And then there was Amber, Bob's assistant. Young, intelligent, efficient. Close enough to be indispensable. According to Linda, the affair had not been discreet. Natalia knew. She had known for months, perhaps longer. She had been furious at first, then indifferent, then strategic. As I left Linda's house, one thing became clear. The image of a flawless marriage had cracks, and cracks tend to widen under pressure. It was time to speak to Bob again. He was not at the company headquarters when I arrived. Amber was. She greeted me without surprise. No visible anxiety, no defensive posture, just composure. Amber did not resemble a cliché. She was not dramatic, not insecure, not reckless. She was measured. When I told her I knew about her relationship with Bob, she did not deny it. There was no flinch. "Yes," she said calmly. "We're together." No apology, no shame, just clarity. She described the marriage between Natalia and Bob as transactional. She was the image, Amber said. He was the weight behind it. It was a practical union, a mutually beneficial arrangement. Fame requires structure. Structure requires funding. Funding requires visibility. They had built something impressive, but not intimate. When I asked if she felt responsible for entering that marriage, Amber did not hesitate. No. Her voice remained steady. What Bob and I have is real. What they had was presentation. People who speak about love with certainty are either deeply committed or deeply convinced. I asked her about Natalia. Amber tilted her head slightly. She wasn't naive. Interesting choice of word. She found her own comfort. And then she mentioned a name. Luke. A man far removed from corporate offices and gala dinners. Modest, she said. Passionate about boats. There was no jealousy in her tone. Only assessment. So now the perfect couple had fractures. The assistant had become a partner, and the wife had found someone else. Two parallel betrayals. Symmetry often hides resentment. But resentment does not always lead to murder. Amber maintained that the relationship between her and Bob had not been secret. At least not recently. They were already separated emotionally, she added. Emotionally separated, a phrase that attempts to reduce responsibility. Before I left, I asked her one final question. When did you last see Natalia? Amber met my eyes. Earlier that week, briefly. No elaboration, no defensiveness. She seemed almost untouchable. But composure is not innocence. It is simply control. And control can be rehearsed. As I walked back to my car, the case no longer felt like a simple act of violence. It felt layered. A husband with a carefully constructed alibi. A best friend with tears that arrived too easily. An assistant who spoke of love as if it were an upgrade. And somewhere in that symmetry, 5 shots had been fired. I found Luke at the marina. The smell of salt and engine oil tends to cling to places like that. Wooden docks, ropes pulled tight. Boats resting as if they were thinking. Luke was exactly where I was told he would be. Working on his boat. When I told him Natalia was dead, he froze. Not dramatically, not theatrically, just still. What do you mean? His confusion felt unpolished. He had not rehearsed this moment, at least not convincingly. Luke did not deny the relationship. He didn't try to reshape it. Yes, he said. We were together. There was no shame in his tone, only something quieter. He told me about the first time they met. Natalia had been filming a commercial at the marina. Luxury meets authenticity, a familiar contrast. She had questions about the boats. He had answers. From there, conversations turned into visits. Visits turned into sales. Luke spoke about the sea, the way some men speak about faith. His family had owned boats for generations. The water was not a hobby. It was inheritance. He showed her the coastline, the open horizon, the kind of silence that does not judge. She was different out there, he said. Lighter, less polished. He claimed those hours at sea were the only time she felt real. Away from cameras, away from charity galas, away from carefully constructed smiles. They had spoken about leaving, about stepping away from the life built on image. A boat, a long journey, no schedules, no interviews, just movement. She wanted that, Luke insisted. She just kept postponing it. Postponement is a quiet form of fear. I asked him where he had been the night she died. Here, he gestured around him. He had been preparing the boat. Routine maintenance. Tools scattered. Witnesses, none clear. A marina at night is rarely crowded. It is private by design. There was something almost romantic about his version of events. Two people choosing authenticity over spectacle. A man offering escape. A woman promising to follow. But romance has a limit. And limits, when reached, become pressure. If everything had been as beautiful as he described, why had Natalia not left? Why remain in a marriage she no longer believed in? Why stay visible if invisibility was freedom? Luke spoke of her as if she were already halfway to departure. But departure requires decision, and decision requires courage. 5 shots in a bedroom suggest something else entirely. I watched him carefully. His hands had small cuts from rope and metal. Nothing unusual. His boat contained no obvious trace of panic. No signs of struggle. Only routine. When I asked if Natalia had seemed afraid recently, he shook his head. No. Just tired of pretending, he said. Another version of tired. Everyone had a version of her. The devoted wife, the ambitious model, the childhood friend, the woman seeking freedom. But did any of them had been with her when the shots were fired? As I walked away from the marina, the wind carried the faint rhythm of halyards against metal masts. Calm, measured, almost peaceful. Luke's story was beautiful, and beauty is persuasive, but it is not proof, especially when 5 bullets were involved. The autopsy report arrived the following morning. Cause of death was clear. Gunshot wounds, 5 of them. But the report offered something more precise. 2 of the bullets had been fired from a distance. The remaining 3 from close range. That distinction matters. The first 2 wounds were not immediately fatal. They struck non-vital areas. Painful, disabling, but survivable for a short period of time. Natalia had fallen. The position of the body confirmed it. She had collapsed onto the floor, her head turned slightly to one side, enough to lift her eyes, enough to see. The final 3 shots had been delivered at close range. Deliberate, controlled, almost ceremonial. This was not panic. This was not chaos. This was not someone firing blindly in anger. Someone had entered that bedroom, shot her twice, watched her fall, stepped closer, and finished it. And if the report was correct, and it usually is, Natalia had been conscious for those final seconds, which means she saw the person standing over her. The last face she would ever see. Hatred is a strong word, but execution suggests something stronger than rage. It suggests intention. Whoever pulled that trigger wanted her dead. But more than that, they wanted her to know. I returned to the house. Scenes speak differently once time has passed. The noise fades. The obvious disappears. What remains is detail. The bedroom remained untouched. No blood removed. No sheets replaced. I moved slowly, not searching, listening. The door frame, the floor near the bed, the window. Then I saw it. Near the inside handle of the bedroom door, barely visible unless the light struck at the right angle. A few small textile fibers. Brown, thin, almost weightless. They had caught on the metal edge of the handle. Natalia's wardrobe had been almost entirely red and blue. Those were her favorite colors. The fibers did not match. Bob, however, owned several jackets in similar tones. Dark brown, muted earth shades. It was the first physical element in the room that pointed outward. Not abstract, not emotional, material. But fibers are tricky. They can transfer easily. They can linger. They can mislead. Before I could follow that thread further, my phone vibrated. The technical team had accessed Natalia's email account. The final exchange had taken place the evening before her death, and the tone was not gentle, not careful, not loving. It was sharp, almost desperate. 5 bullets in a silent bedroom. Brown fibers on a door handle. And now, words that did not read like affection. The case was no longer built on jealousy and suspicion alone. It had shape, and shape changes everything. The final emails were not romantic. They were sharp, urgent, stripped of illusion. Natalia had written first, clear, direct, unapologetic. She would not leave. Not yet. Not for him. Her public life mattered. Her image mattered. Her position mattered. If you can't accept that, she had written, then maybe we shouldn't continue. There are moments when love stops sounding like love. Luke's reply had come minutes later. Short, angry, If that's how this ends, I'd rather see you dead. Words written in anger rarely disappear. They wait. I returned to the marina. Luke did not look surprised this time. He looked tired. When I placed the printed exchange in front of him, he read it slowly. He did not deny it. I was angry, he said quietly. She kept postponing everything. He admitted the pressure. He admitted the ultimatum. But he insisted it had been nothing more than a fight. I would never hurt her, he said. His voice did not rise. It did not tremble. It softened. He spoke about regret, about how he had planned to apologize, about how he would now live with those final words forever. It was convincing, almost painfully so. But regret can exist alongside violence. I asked him again about that night. His timeline remained unchanged. Alone at the marina. Routine work. No clear witnesses. The kind of alibi that depends on darkness. As he stood to walk me back toward the dock, I noticed something. The jacket he wore was brown, muted, earth-toned, the same shade as the fibers found on the bedroom door handle. Coincidence is common, but patterns are not. I said nothing. Color proves nothing. But it adds weight. As I stepped off the dock, my phone vibrated. Forensic analysis of the office surveillance had come in. Bob's version of that evening was incomplete. He had left earlier than he claimed. The timestamp did not align with his statement. Not dramatically, but enough. Enough to create space. Enough for possibility. I looked back at Luke. The wind moved across the water in quiet lines. He stood there, still, watching me. A man who had written words he could not erase. A man who claimed he loved her. A man who said he would never hurt her. And now, a husband whose alibi was beginning to fracture. The fibers remained. The emails lingered. 5 bullets still waited for their answer. This was no longer about jealousy alone. It was about who had the will to finish what anger had begun. And I had 2 men whose stories no longer fit perfectly. The office cameras rarely lie. They simply record. And what they recorded that evening was not a meeting. Bob had left earlier than he claimed. Not dramatically, just enough to create room. Amber followed shortly after. But it was the exchange before they left that mattered. She stood near his desk, close enough that the camera barely framed her face. "I can't wait until we're finally together," she said. Bob smiled. "It will happen sooner than you think." Then she laughed. "Sometimes I honestly wish that witch Natalia would just disappear." It was said lightly, almost playfully. They both smiled, and then they walked out. Jokes are often rehearsals for truth. I returned to Bob's company. This time, I didn't ask about the meeting. I told him it hadn't existed. He froze for a fraction of a second, the kind of pause most people wouldn't notice. He struggled to assemble a new version. Yes, he'd left early. Yes, he had lied. He said he had driven to a promenade just outside the city. He needed time. He planned to confront Natalia, to insist on divorce. He claimed he had walked alone for hours, rehearsing his speech. No witnesses, no receipts, just solitude. The brown jacket he wore matched the one in the surveillance footage, and matched the fibers found at the bedroom door. Coincidence again, or repetition? He admitted he had asked for divorce before and been refused. Natalia cared about image, about reputation, about avoiding scandal. He claimed frustration, but not violence. When I left him, I went directly to Amber. She was composed, as always. I mentioned the remark about Natalia disappearing. She smiled. It was just a silly joke, she said. A bad one, I must admit. She denied any direct confrontation with Natalia. She described her instead: cold, self-centered, protective of her public persona. She wouldn't let Bob be happy, Amber said calmly. But I believed she would eventually accept reality. No anger, no cracks, only control. As we finished, she rose from her chair. She slipped into an elegant brown coat. The same muted tone, the same shade, the same color that had already followed me through 3 conversations. She excused herself. A medical appointment, she said. Her steps were measured, unhurried. The fibers connect everyone. The lies fracture slowly. Bob's story had shifted. Amber's tone had not. And Luke's words still echoed in the back of my mind. 5 bullets. 1 bedroom. Too many people who would have benefited. The evidence pointed everywhere, which meant it pointed nowhere. Not yet. But beneath the control, beneath the rehearsed calm, someone had already crossed the line. Hatred leaves traces long before violence does. The update came quietly, not from forensics, not from surveillance, from the noise of the public. On an online discussion group dedicated to Natalia's case, Linda had been active, very active. Her words were not cautious. They were not grieving. They were celebratory. She finally got what she deserved. Karma doesn't forget. Some crowns are meant to fall. The timestamps were recent. After the murder. After the tears. I returned to her apartment. She opened the door and immediately resumed the role. Red eyes, trembling voice, that she still doesn't believe she's gone. The performance was flawless, until I placed the printed screenshots on the table. Her expression did not fade. It shattered. There's a moment when someone realizes the script is no longer working. Her shoulders stiffened. Her breathing changed. The tears stopped instantly. You were celebrating, I said calmly. She stared at the pages. Then she laughed. Not softly, not nervously, sharply. Yes, she said. Yes, I was. The shift was violent. The grief evaporated. What remained was fury. She stole everything from me, she shouted. Her voice rose. Not theatrical now. Raw. From her point of view, Natalia always outshone her. In modeling, Natalia took every contract Linda wanted. In television, every spotlight, every opportunity. According to her, Natalia's success had never been coincidence. It had been sabotage. Natalia made sure she never rose above her. Her narrative was obsessive, personal, twisted around years of resentment. And you still called her your friend, I said. I was waiting, she snapped. For the moment, I would finally take back what was mine. Her breathing became uneven. Her hands trembled. Not with sadness, but rage. For once in my life, she whispered, she wasn't the one winning. For a few seconds, the room was silent. And in that silence, something dangerous existed. This was not controlled anger. This was corrosion. The kind that builds slowly and then explodes. A person in that state could do anything. An access of instability. A sudden visit. A confrontation that escalates. 2 shots from a distance. 3 from up close. It fit. Almost. I asked her directly if she had visited Natalia that night. She denied it. But her denial lacked structure. It was emotional. Reactive. Not rehearsed. Which made it harder to read. As I stood to leave, something caught my eye. Near the entrance, hanging on a coat rack, a brown overcoat. Muted. Earth-toned. The same color that had followed me through every suspect. Bob wore it. Luke wore it. Amber wore it. And now Linda. The fibers no longer narrowed the field. They blurred it. Everyone had motive. Everyone had resentment. Everyone had access. But motive and instability are not the same as execution. 5 bullets. 3 delivered at close range. Not wild, not chaotic. Deliberate. Linda's anger was explosive, but the crime had been measured. As I stepped outside, I felt the case tightening. Hatred is loud. Control is quiet. And the person who killed Natalia had been very quiet. I returned to the bedroom alone. Cases rarely end where the shouting happens. They end where silence lingers. The room remained unchanged. Truth hides in corners. I stood near the doorway, reconstructed the movement. No hesitation, no wandering. Whoever did this knew exactly where she would be. Natalia had been standing near the window, back turned. 2 shots. Distance. She falls. Then the shift, the approach. 3 final shots. Closer. Personal. I studied the door again. The metal edge of the inner panel. That was where the fibers had been found. But something else caught the light this time. Barely visible, almost fused into the mosaic texture of the door. A single strand. Dark, not long, not obvious. Just there. I lifted it carefully. A hair. Natalia and Bob were both blonde. This was not. It was darker, brown, fine, delicate. Easy to miss, easy to leave behind. It went to the lab. I waited. After a while, the report arrived. It belonged to a female. Estimated age between 20 and 40. Blue eyes. That detail narrowed the field. Linda had dark eyes. Amber's were blue. Age range matched both women. But something about Linda's volatility had never aligned with execution. This had been controlled, measured, intimate. I waited outside Amber's building. When she stepped out, she carried herself the same way she always had. Composed, balanced, precise. I stepped in front of her. She met my eyes without hesitation. "Good morning, Detective. Can I help you?" she said. Her tone was identical to every previous conversation. Calm, diplomatic. I did not answer her question. I asked her to join me to the station. She did not resist. Not then. Not in the car. Not in the hallway of the station. Silence can be a form of confidence or surrender. In the interrogation room, I placed the evidence in front of her. She glanced at it, then at me. And then I told her what I already knew. That changed her expression. Just slightly. "Family," she said, after a long pause. That was all I ever wanted. She spoke slowly, deliberately, as if explaining something rational. When she met Bob, she thought everything was aligning. But he was trapped. Natalia refused to let him go. Not because she loved him, but because she refused to lose. In her version of reality, Natalia was an obstacle, an illness, a corruption. She would have destroyed everything she and Bob could have had. So Amber chose to remove the obstacle. She described it without trembling. She had known that they often let the garage door unlocked, known about the routine, known Natalia often stood by the window in the evenings. So she entered the garage, then in the kitchen, then up the stairs, straight to Natalia's bedroom. She fired twice, watched her fall, walked closer, and ended it. She looked straight into my eyes. She finally understood, Amber said quietly. There was no hysteria, no shouting, only certainty. What she had not calculated was the smallest detail. A strand of hair, a fragment of presence. Violence is rarely perfect, even when it believes it is. When she finished speaking, she folded her hands in her lap. And that was all. From that moment on, she didn't say another word. Amber believed she had restored balance. She believed she had liberated the future she deserved. Instead, she destroyed it. 5 bullets, 1 strand of hair, and a dream twisted into justification. As I left the station that night, the city felt quieter than usual. People think crimes begin with anger. They don't. They begin with entitlement, with the belief that one life is negotiable for another. Every secret leaves a trace, and sometimes it's the smallest one that ends everything.